What if I told you that death is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a miracle that defies all human logic? What you are about to discover goes against everything you were ever taught about pain, loss, and faith. While the world celebrates technological progress and earthly conquests, one Italian mother lived through something science cannot explain and religion calls a miracle. Antonia Salzano lost her son Carlo when he was only 15 years old, but what happened afterward completely transformed her understanding of heaven, spirituality, and God's plan. This is not about abstract comfort or pretty phrases from a Sunday sermon. This is about two real children, about twins who came into the world when everything seemed already finished. This is not a story of self-help or cheap motivation. It is a testimony of faith that shakes the very foundations of what we think is possible. If you have ever wondered whether God listens, whether prayer truly has power, and whether there is something beyond this life, get ready, because what you are about to read is not a theory of devotion, but living proof that the gospel message of hope is still being written in the 21st century. There are stories that seem too perfect to be true, aren't there? And then you discover they are so real that they force you to question everything you thought you knew about how the world works. The story of Carlo Acutis is one of them. It is not a fairy tale or a medieval legend lost in dusty church books. It is the life of an ordinary boy, born in 1991 in London, raised in Milan, who played video games, used the internet, and had friends like any young Christian of his time. And yet, there was something different about him, something his peers sensed even if they could not fully explain it. Carlo had a bond with faith that was not imposed by his parents, but flowed from within him like a clear spring of spirituality. While other teenagers wandered aimlessly through social media, he used his digital talent to create a virtual exhibition of Eucharistic miracles, documenting with the passion of a programmer and the devotion of a saint more than 136 events confirmed by Scripture and Christian history. Can you imagine a 15-year-old studying sacred relics while his classmates scroll through TikTok? That was Carlo. His life seemed as if it had been written by God's own hand, with clear intention and purpose, and it still moves millions of people today. Carlo did not preach on street corners or organize massive worship gatherings in stadiums. His way of living the gospel was different, quieter, but just as powerful. He went to Mass every day, something almost unheard of for a modern teenager, and he received communion with such reverence that those who saw it were left speechless. He used to say, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven," a sentence that summed up his entire theology and today appears on murals, t-shirts, and Bible study materials around the world. He was not a dull religious fanatic. He played video games, watched movies, laughed with his friends, and enjoyed life like any other boy. But his faith had taken root in such rich soil that everything he did was infused with the presence of Christ. He helped the homeless, defended classmates who were bullied, spoke about Jesus without shame or insecurity, with the natural ease of someone who breathes. In a time when speaking publicly about faith can make you seem odd or outdated, Carlo did it with such authenticity that even skeptics listened. His faith was not confined within church walls. It spilled into every corner of daily life. And then came what no one expected. In October 2006, Carlo began to feel unwell. Dizziness, nausea, headaches that did not go away despite medication. Doctors ran tests, then more tests, until the diagnosis no parent ever wants to hear was spoken: acute leukemia. Within days, this boy full of life, plans, and unshakable faith was fighting an invisible enemy that showed no mercy. On October 12, 2006, barely a week after the diagnosis, Carlo Acutis died. He was 15 years old, an age when life is just beginning, when so many dreams are waiting to unfold. His death left a massive emptiness, a deafening silence in his family, in his parish, and among all who knew that special light that radiated from him. But this is where something extraordinary begins. His death was not the end. It was the beginning of something far greater, something that made him the first saint of the millennial generation, a model for young Christians around the world, and an intercessor whose name is now spoken with reverence in testimonies of faith from millions of people. Holiness was no longer reserved for medieval monks or missionaries in distant lands. It was here, in the digital age, wearing sneakers and using the internet. Antonia Salzano's grief was crushing. Imagine losing your teenage son overnight, watching the spark that lit up your home disappear, hearing silence where there had once been laughter, plans, conversations about games and about God. The house filled with the presence of absence, so thick it could almost be touched. Every corner cried out Carlo's name. Every object painfully reminded her of what was no longer there. Parents who have lived this know there are no words of comfort that are enough, no embrace that can fill that void, no sermon, no matter how beautiful, that can erase the piercing pain of loss. Antonia walked through the rooms like a shadow, touching Carlo's things, smelling his clothes, looking at photographs, trying to keep alive a presence that now existed only in her memory. Tears became her daily reality, sorrow her constant companion, and the unanswered question, why, echoed in her mind day and night. Many in her place would have lost their faith, would have shouted in anger toward heaven, would have shut the door on any spirituality deemed cruel and unjust. But Antonia, broken and shattered, clung to the very thing Carlo had lived by: prayer and trust in God's plan. It was not easy, of course not. There were very dark days, endless nights when the pain felt stronger than any conviction. Antonia wondered how to go on, how to get up each morning, knowing Carlo would not be at the breakfast table, that she would never see him grow up, fall in love, start his own family. That is how grief works. It comes like a wave that sweeps you away without warning and forces you to question everything, even what once seemed unshakable. But in the middle of that valley of shadows, something strange began to happen. Antonia felt an unexplainable certainty, an inner voice whispering that Carlo was not gone, that he had not dissolved into nothingness. He is home, she would tell herself, even though that home was no longer the apartment in Milan, but something far greater and brighter. This certainty did not come from self-help books or empty motivational slogans. It came from something deeper, from the faith Carlo had lived, which now seemed to support his mother from the other side. Scripture says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." And Antonia was about to experience that promise in a way she never could have imagined. Her perseverance in faith amid tears was not heroic or dramatic. It was quiet, trembling, full of human doubts and moments of collapse. But it was real. Antonia continued to go to church, even though every Mass reminded her of Carlo. She continued to pray, even when words dissolved into sobs. She continued to seek God, even though she did not understand why he had allowed her son to leave so early. And it was precisely in that search, in that stubborn refusal to let go of God's hand, even when everything hurt, that the miracle began to take shape. Miracles do not always arrive in moments of triumphant faith. They often come in darkness, when you are broken and no longer have the strength to pretend everything is fine. They come when a heart, opened by pain, must let the light in. For Antonia, that light would appear in a way so concrete and tangible that it would forever change her understanding of heaven, death, and the endless love of God. Antonia had always had a devotion to the Blessed Mother, but after Carlo's death, that devotion became her refuge. When she did not know where to turn, when the pain was so great that words failed, she would kneel before an image of Mary and simply cry. She did not recite elaborate prayers or cling to formal formulas. She spoke to her as one mother to another, as someone who had lost what was most precious and sought understanding from the one who had also watched her son die. "You know what this means," she whispered through tears. "You stood at the cross. You understand." And in those moments of complete vulnerability, Antonia began to feel something unexplainable, a presence. It was not imagination or self-suggestion. It felt real, almost tangible, as if an invisible hand were gently touching her face and whispering that everything would be all right. Marian spirituality, so often misunderstood, became for her a bridge between heaven and earth, between human pain and God's consolation. It was during one of these moments of deep prayer that Antonia experienced something that set everything in motion. It was October 12th, the exact day of Carlo's death, and also the feast of Our Lady of the Pillar, a detail she could not ignore. While praying in church, she felt her heart flooded with an inexplicable peace, a peace so deep that it stood in stark contrast to the emotional storm of the past months. It was not empty or resigned peace, but a luminous one, as if telling her the story was not over, that God was writing a new chapter, even though she could not yet see the whole book. At the time, Antonia did not know it, but she was receiving the first sign of what was to come. The symbolism of the date, the convergence of events, the mystical closeness of Mary, all of it was part of a much greater plan that would reveal itself in the most surprising way. That sense of Mary's presence was not a one-time experience. It returned in the weeks that followed, always bringing a comfort Antonia could not put into words. It was as if heaven were speaking to her in a language beyond reason, reaching straight into the heart of a wounded mother. Friends from the parish noticed the change, a new gentleness appearing even through her tears. "There's something different about you," they would say. And they were right. Antonia was being prepared, shaped, and healed by God's hand, which works in God's time, not ours. Faith stopped being just a Sunday ritual and became a living encounter, an ongoing dialogue with the sacred. And then, when she least expected it, the news came that changed everything. Antonia discovered she was pregnant. At an age when she thought that chapter of life was closed, when grief had filled her entire emotional world, life found a way again. And not just any way. Tests revealed something extraordinary. She was carrying twins. 2 children growing within her when everything had seemed finished. Her first reaction was shock and disbelief. How could this be? Why now? What did it all mean? Over time, Antonia began to understand that this was no coincidence. It was an answer, a miracle she had asked for without even knowing what form it would take. Doctors spoke of statistics and biology, but she knew, with the kind of certainty only deep faith gives, that there was something more. These children were a gift from heaven, a sign that Carlo was still present. The pregnancy unfolded in an atmosphere of joy and awe. Every movement of the twins was a reminder that God had not abandoned the Acutis family, that the gospel of life was still being written in the midst of pain. Testimonies from others began to pour in. Some said, "This is a miracle." Others said, "This is God's response to your faithfulness." And they were all right. Because what was happening in Antonia's womb was more than a biological process. It was a revelation of God's power to bring life where there had been mourning, and to multiply love where it seemed only emptiness remained. That time became a deep healing, even spiritually. Antonia spoke to the twins as if Carlo were somehow present in them, and in a certain sense, he was. The day of their birth was an explosion of light after years of darkness. Michelle and Francesca were born healthy, full of life and promise. The symbolism of this double gift was impossible to miss. Why 2? Why twins? Some saw in it a sign of God's generosity, which knows no measure. Carlo was one. Now there were 2. The pain of losing one was transformed into multiplied joy. It was as if God were saying, "I am not only giving back what you lost, I am giving you more, so you may understand how great my love is." For Antonia, holding the twins in her arms was like taking a breath after years underwater. They did not replace Carlo, but they gave her new strength to live. Eventually, the moment of full clarity came. Antonia looked at the sleeping twins and whispered softly, "Now I understand why." She understood that Carlo's life, though short, had been full of meaning. It was not a punishment or cruelty, but part of a greater plan. Carlo had come to light a flame and had gone on to continue his work from heaven. That realization changed her view of suffering. It was no longer meaningless. It became part of a larger whole. Faith teaches that nothing is lost when it is entrusted to God. Not a tear, not a cry, not a night filled with questions. Everything can be transformed. The story did not end with the birth of the twins. Carlo's action only grew stronger. Testimonies of graces and healings began to arrive from around the world. The healing of a boy in Brazil was recognized as the miracle that led to Carlo's beatification in 2020. That 15-year-old who lived such a short life was now touching millions. Michelle and Francesca grew up knowing they were a living sign of that intercession. Their lives were an answer from heaven. And Antonia, watching them, felt gratitude. She knew death had not had the final word, that the story was still unfolding. Family life was permeated with faith, but in a way that did not overwhelm, but nourished and helped them grow. At breakfast, talking about the gospel was as natural as talking about schoolwork. Evenings ended with prayer, simple prayer, where each person spoke to God like a close father, not a distant judge. Sunday Mass was not a heavy obligation, but a long-awaited meeting, a time of being together with a community of faith that had supported them in dark times and rejoiced with them in brighter ones. Michelle and Francesca saw that their parents lived what they spoke, and that may be the strongest form of religious education. Example, live daily, consistently, without contradiction. Antonia did not need to give long speeches about the importance of prayer or reading scripture. They saw it in her, in how she faced trials, in how she spoke about Carlo with tears in her eyes, but a smile on her lips, in her gratitude to God for what she had received rather than bitterness over what she had lost. That unity of heaven and earth within the home was almost tangible. Visitors often said there was something special in that house, a presence difficult to describe but deeply felt. It was not exaggerated mysticism or pious imagination. It was simply the fruit of a family that had learned to live with one foot on earth and one in heaven, aware that reality is far wider than what our five senses suggest. Photos of Carlo were not hidden away because they hurt too much. They were displayed with pride because he remained a living member of the family. His room did not become a heavy and touchable shrine. It was adapted for the twins because Carlo would have wanted that space to continue serving life, filled with children's laughter. This way of living grief, transforming it without denying it, integrating loss into life without being imprisoned by it, is a true lesson in spiritual and emotional health that our world desperately needs today. Antonia did not, however, retreat into the recovered happiness of her family. She felt a clear calling, a mission that went beyond her own story. She began to give public testimony, sharing her journey in parishes, prayer meetings, and conferences for young Christians. She did not do it for attention or as part of any communication strategy. She did it because she knew her story could restore hope to other broken parents, other families shattered by incomprehensible loss. This public mission became part of her new identity. She was no longer only a mother who had lost a son. She was also a woman who had received a miracle and felt responsible to bear witness to it. She traveled throughout Italy, across Europe, and beyond, carrying not only words but the living presence of Michelle and Francesca, two living proofs that God is still writing astonishing stories at the very heart of the 21st century. One of Carlo's most tangible legacies is the exhibition on Eucharistic miracles that he designed as a teenager. This digital project, born from his personal devotion, became a tool of evangelization that now travels the world. The exhibition has been shown in hundreds of cities, in cathedrals and parishes, at youth gatherings and spiritual congresses. Thousands approached it with skepticism and left deeply moved, questioning what they thought they knew about the supernatural and the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Carlo documented miracles such as Lanciano, where in the 8th century a consecrated host became human heart tissue, and Buenos Aires, where a discarded host began to bleed in 1996. Each panel carries, in a way, Carlo's digital signature, his conviction that the sacred is not opposed to technology, that faith can be expressed through pixels as well as stained glass. Antonia often accompanies these exhibitions, telling the story of the project, explaining how her son devoted months of his short life to researching, verifying, and organizing these events with the rigor of a scholar and the heart of a believer. The Acutis family thus became a worldwide testimony, not by their own choosing, but by answering God's call with humility. They appear in documentaries, interviews, and books about modern saints. And yet, what stands out most is their simplicity, normalcy, and authenticity, without theatrical holiness or manufactured speeches. When Antonia speaks publicly, she does so with the simplicity of someone telling what she lived, without embellishment or exaggeration. When Michelle and Francesca participate in religious events, they are simply children, spontaneous and fresh, without forced staging. That authenticity is what makes their witness so powerful. They are not selling a product or promoting a shallow version of Christianity. They live their faith with all its richness, joys, and struggles, and that deeply moves millions of people tired of hypocrisy and empty religiosity. The transformation of grief into service may be the deepest lesson of this entire story. Antonia could have remained a prisoner of her pain, locked in the role of a tragic victim. No one would have judged her for it. The loss of a child is a wound that never fully closes, a scar that can ache even decades later. But she chose another path, or rather, allowed herself to be led along another path. She took that immense pain and made it the engine of a mission. Every tear shed became a seed of hope for others. Every sleepless night crying for Carlo became an experience capable of consoling other parents lost in the same darkness. She never minimized her suffering or pretended it was not devastating. On the contrary, she honored it by turning it into a bridge to other wounded hearts. And in doing so, she continued to heal herself, because there is something deeply restorative in giving meaning to pain, in discovering that personal tragedy can become light for others. When Antonia meets parents who have lost a child, she does not offer ready-made phrases from spiritual self-help books or empty promises that everything will be fine. She speaks to them from the trenches, from the very heart of the dark night she herself endured. She talks about days when she had no strength to get out of bed, moments when she questioned everything, when life seemed meaningless. But she also speaks of the small lights that gradually appeared, of prayer that became an anchor when everything else was falling apart, of Mary's presence that held her when nothing else could. She does not promise that the pain will disappear overnight or that everyone will receive miraculous twins. Every story is different. Every path of healing unfolds differently. But she offers something even more precious, the assurance that you are not alone, the conviction that it is possible to survive what seems unbearable, and that someone is still writing the story, even when everything looks like chaos and absurdity. The hope Antonia shares is neither illusory nor escapist. It is not toxic optimism that denies suffering and forces a smile when the soul is in pieces. It is hope rooted in the concrete experience of passing through fire and emerging transformed, not untouched, but stronger, deeper, more aware of what truly matters in life. It is hope born of knowing that God wastes no suffering, that He can take even the most terrible tragedy and weave something beautiful from it, even if, in the middle of pain, we cannot yet see the full pattern. This hope does not wipe away tears, but gives them meaning. It does not remove absence, but fills it with divine presence. It does not restore what was lost, but opens new paths we never could have imagined. And for someone drowning in grief, it is a lifeline that can determine whether they give up or keep going. The faith that sustains you when everything collapses is not a shallow faith, the faith of someone who has never truly been tested. It is faith forged in fire, faith that clings to God even when His ways are not understood, that still believes in His goodness when circumstances seem to scream the opposite. Antonia often says her faith did not grow stronger despite suffering, but through it. When everything that once seemed solid disappears, when you lose what you believed essential for happiness, you discover whether your faith is built on rock or on sand. Hers was built on rock, not because she herself was exceptionally strong or spiritual, but because she held onto the only true rock, even when her hands trembled and her heart bled. She now passes on that tested faith with an authority that comes not from academic knowledge, but from lived experience, from someone who walked through the valley of the shadow of death and came out the other side. There is one message Antonia repeats again and again, especially to suffering parents: the certainty that God is still writing the story. The death of a child is not the period at the end of a family's story. It is horrific, devastating, and leaves a permanent mark. But it is not the end. God continues to act, to create, to open new chapters, even if from our limited perspective, we cannot yet see them. Carlo died at 15, and everything seemed finished. And yet look today, he is blessed, a model for millions of young people. His exhibition on Eucharistic miracles travels the world. His intercession touches lives on every continent, and his twin siblings are growing up as living proof that the story goes on. Who could have imagined such a scenario when Antonia stood weeping beside her son's coffin? No one. Our scripts are narrow and short-sighted. God's is wide, embracing eternity, connecting lives that never met, weaving meanings we sometimes understand only years later. This eternal perspective profoundly changes how loss is lived, not because it diminishes the present pain, very real and sharp, but because it places it within a broader horizon, where death is not the final monster, but a passage, a transformation. Christianity has taught this for centuries, in sermons and Bible studies. But hearing it is one thing. Seeing it embodied in a real family, with real faces, real tears, and tangible joys is another. The Acutis family became a living letter from heaven, not written on paper, but read on human faces, in sibling embraces, in the smile of a mother who lost everything and received more than she ever imagined. Millions read this letter. It changes perspectives and restores courage to those who thought they had no reason left to believe. At the heart of this entire story is complete trust in divine providence. It is not naive or blind trust that denies problems or pretends everything is fine. It is mature trust that says, I do not understand, but I trust, believing there is a design even when we see only chaos, relying on God's love even when that love allows trials that tear the heart apart. Antonia learned this trust through experience. It did not come easily or automatically. It was the fruit of a journey, of daily choosing to let go of control, to stop demanding explanations, to accept that some mysteries will only be understood on the other side of life. And in embracing that trust, she paradoxically found a peace that surpasses all understanding, the peace the Apostle Paul wrote about, the peace that seems impossible until you experience it yourself. Carlo Acutis became an example for an entire generation that thought holiness was reserved for medieval monks or missionaries in faraway lands. And yet here he is, a teenager playing video games, surfing the internet, wearing sneakers, with an email address and downloaded software. Outwardly completely ordinary, inwardly radically different. That combination is what makes his witness so powerful for young people today. They cannot say saints were from another era. Carlo lived in the same digital culture, faced the same temptations of superficiality, felt the same pressure to conform. And yet, he chose differently. He chose to place Christ at the center, not in a heavy or dull way, but with joy, creativity, and authenticity. That example leads millions of young people to rethink their relationship with faith, with the church, with God himself. The Acutis family, with Antonia as the main voice and Andrea, Michelle, and Francesca as a quiet but present chorus, became the living letter the world needed. They are not perfect and do not pretend to be. They have days of fatigue, tension, moments of doubt, but they are real, and through their fragility, light shines from above. When you see them together, hear them speak of Carlo not with crushing sorrow, but with joy permeated by hope. Watch the twins grow up aware they are a miracle, but without arrogance. You realize you are witnessing theology lived. Not abstract doctrine, but the gospel made flesh again, the message of resurrection, translated into family experience, the promise that God transforms death into life, made visible and credible. And here, We reach the very heart of it all, the certainty that sustains every word of this testimony. God transforms pain into an eternal purpose. This is not magic, not cheap positive thinking, not denial of painful reality. It is God's alchemy, the paschal mystery applied to a concrete life, the cross becoming resurrection when placed in good hands. Antonia's pain after losing Carlo was real, devastating, almost unbearable. But God took it and transformed it into a testimony that brings hope to millions, into a mission that brings light into the darkest places, into a family enlarged through the birth of twins. The suffering did not disappear. The wound was not erased, but it was given meaning. And that is the promise of the gospel, not that we will avoid suffering, but that no suffering will be wasted if it is lived in faith. Every tear is gathered, every cry is heard, every dark night is already being transformed into something that will shine for eternity.